to celebrate International Women's Day.
Yes.
And I couldn't think of a better partner in crime to have this discussion with. My only hesitation, Ruth, is that we probably have so much to say. How will we limit ourselves in the time that we have?
Exactly.
But just to even kick us off, what's top of mind as we celebrate International Women's Day in a couple of days' time?
I'm getting a bit of a echo. Hang on one sec. I was going to start by asking you how optimistic or pessimistic you might be feeling about women thriving in their lives and in workplaces in particular. I don't want to come in on International Women's Day with pure pessimism.
So it's a great question. So one of the things that I have learned as I have, I guess, matured in my perspective in life, or matured into, you know, having an ease in my professional capacity, is that I need to hold optimism and pessimism hand in hand. And I think that was probably a big learning curve for me, where, you know, when I started out earlier in my career, I would have, you know, just always been about the optimism, the optimism. And just to kind of put that into a little bit of context, I started my first job in 1999, and I went into the office on my first day, and when I look back on it, I was so surprised. I started my career, as you know, in construction and in real estate. I'm a chartered surveyor by background. And it was only when I went into the office to start working on that first day that I realized, oh my God, where are all the women? You know, there were women there, but they were in secretarial roles, or they were in, you know, kind of more supportive roles, not in the kind of professional roles. So that was kind of it was a bit of a shock for me. But then I realized, as I start kind of navigating through the decades of my career, that was really naivety on my part, if that makes sense, like for it to be such a shock to me. So over the decades, I have been blessed with many occasions of optimism and seen many great things happen. However, I also still see things happening now that were happening 25 years ago, and you kind of think, really are we still there?
Yeah.
So that's probably a long answer to your question, Ruth, but
it so very much resonates. It delights me that you could say all that stuff with a smile. So I'm going to echo some of your experiences. I made a very similar transition. I was, you know, as a college student and a new scholar and researcher, I was a social psychologist. So I was embedded in the field of psychology, which has over time actually become a female dominated profession. And so the transition from being part of a social science network into business schools, right, which is a far more male dominated, absolutely, and still is a male dominated environment, the norms shifted. The level of just sort of casual disrespect that I encountered for no reason other than right, and then general skepticism about young women knowing anything about business, and it was pretty undermining, right? I mean, you know, they say that sort of major transitions and learning and development as a leader often happen as a consequence of negative experiences and setbacks. I would just like to wish far fewer of those for women who are stepping into their professional life and into leadership roles. But you know, I think one of the things that has stayed with me through that personal experience and through really diving into the research literature on the conditions under which women thrive in their working lives and the conditions under which women um, are welcomed as leaders. What are the conditions under which both men and women are thriving in the workplace and the relationships across genders are positive? The big answer that keeps coming back to me is proportions. It's all numbers, right? It's not all numbers, but it's a prerequisite for all of the other kinds of social and organizational interventions that make a difference. So, you know, reading Rosa Beth Kanter's work, which still just rings true. Her book, Men and Women of the Corporation, and in particular, her chapter on power, and the effects of just being close to parity, at least like 50-50 men and women, and how, you know, what has stayed with me is the difficulty of getting there, because the research evidence all says that when you start increasing the proportions of women in a profession or in an organization for a while, things get a lot worse. So when women are still at sort of token levels or a small proportion of the population, as the numbers of women increase, the relationships of men and women and discrimination of women actually intensifies until you get close to parity, when you're close to 50%. So that's sort of my early education in that. And more recently, I don't know if you've been reading Anita Williams Woolley's work on collective intelligence in teams.
Yes,
You would love this stuff. Yeah, you do. Yeah,
I
figured. Um,
love
you know,
Willie's.
there's surprise findings, she and her colleagues, about um, the most effective teams, when you look at the composition of the most effective teams, that all female teams outperform every other gender composition, every other combination of men and women you can imagine, except, you know, there's one exception, which is
Mhm.
teams that are all women except one man. And it's interesting to read the sort of speculations about and interpretations of like what happens in the process when you have a single male and an otherwise female team. But it is that the power of numbers and how much better things get for women when we're surrounded by other women. It's
I,
still the major point of intervention. Yeah.
for our audience that might not be familiar with Anita and some of her other colleagues' work, and this idea of collective intelligence, that is a group form of intelligence, Ruth. It might just be interesting to share a couple of the insights as to what exactly we're talking about when we talk about collective intelligence, how that's different to individual intelligence. What I found also fascinating about her work was the idea of competitive interruptions, and how competitive interruptions on male teams are useful things to happen. But if you have a mixed team of male to females, those competitive interruptions not so useful. So maybe just share with our audience a little bit about this whole idea of collective intelligence, group intelligence, and some of the observations that they made.
Okay.
And what I found fascinating about the studies as well is that it held up for co-located teams, and it also held up for dispersed teams. So maybe just say a little bit more for those that are new to this whole idea of collective intelligence and the insights around women in particular, given that our focus is International Women's Day.
I actually love the question, which is, so collective intelligence is the idea that you can bring together a set of people with an array of talents, and the typical prediction would be that whatever they produce would be the sum of the individual capabilities. Collective intelligence is the idea that a team can be punching above its weight. In other words, a given set of talents in the individuals can actually foster synergy, that the team is actually able to generate ideas, to solve problems, that no one individual could have done alone, and that in fact, as a consequence of the way they work together, they're better able to do something. And that's kind of the holy grail for those of us who work with teams. Like, how can you really help a team achieve those synergies, use the best of their talents, multiply what actually comes out of the team? And so that's what Anita and her colleagues have been studying, and they've looked at a variety of influences on collective intelligence. When do you see that kind of capability emerge? And the gender composition finding was not what they were pursuing. That was a surprise finding in the first set of studies they were doing. And since then, Anita and her colleagues have been trying to unpack why is that? Like, what is different about exclusively female or female dominated groups? And a lot of it has to do with the ability of women, the sort of nuanced social capabilities, the ability to more quickly recognize who else in the team knows something, more quickly able to signal that, and to collaboratively work towards surfacing those things. And so what you were just describing there about the competitive interruptions it's a process observation about the difference in how the typical way of working arises in groups with different gender composition. So I was just reading actually a paper on I know you work with some of these, on interdisciplinary science and teams that are collectively doing science. This was a paper that showed that science teams doing discovery or solving problems from an interdisciplinary perspective have very different gender cultures depending on the composition of the team. So women-dominated science teams progress science by a much more collaborative, mutually supportive, surfacing what differences actually can contribute. And what you were characterizing there, the competitive interrupts, I would characterize it as shooting other people's ideas down in the interest of science, right? That you've surely been in academia, in those kinds of talks that people do, where there's always a barb and there's always a skeptical attitude towards the speaker's ideas. But it is two very different ways of, I think, serving the function of surfacing the best ideas and trying to identify those and send them forward. But they go about it very differently, groups that are composed of predominantly men or predominantly women. And it resonated for me when I was reading that in my own experiences in research teams of different kinds of gender mixes. Yeah.
Gender basis. It's fascinating, really. I guess by the time I left that first job that I described, I was leading an all-female team, and completely through my intentional hiring, I guess, also meant that this started to disseminate out into the wider function, and it became much more balanced. And then during COVID, um, I had the opportunity to work with 3 other researchers, and we were an all-female researching team, and it was such a fabulous experience. And now, as you know, we're doing some research with some of our with one of our clients, and it just so happens that the team working on it from our organization and the team working on it from their organization is an all female team. And I'm not, I guess what I'm always worried about is that, you know, there's an interpretation here that, you know, it's kind of, um, you know, a kind of I don't even know how to put words on it, but you know that women are sometimes find themselves in this position of even having to speak up in this way. The fact that we even, you know, have an International Women's Day, the fact that we're still going over the same issues that are decades old, and you know,
Yeah.
have individual lived experiences of this kind of environment. And sometimes it gets misinterpreted as, you know, oh, well, all female teams, we know what kind of female you are. And it's just not that at all.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious around maybe sharing some of your lived experiences of, you know, being a female in academia, which, as we all know, female instructors are critiqued
For
differently
what they
to
wear.
male instructors, in terms of, you know, publications, all of the different things that we know in the academic world. And then, of course, you and I now out in practice working with
Yeah.
senior leadership teams, and you know, experiencing the dynamics that go on in different compositions of senior leadership teams. Just any kind of insights that you want to share around some of our more lived experiences.
Yes. You know, if you work with senior leadership teams, the numbers and proportions are really terribly skewed. Not so much in certain countries that have worked very hard, you know, to promote women into leadership positions, but the vast majority of leadership teams that I have worked with are, some of them were, a fair number of them are exclusively male. Almost none of them have been dominantly women. And you and I actually have a shared experience working with a team where the women in the top team, the senior executive team of the organization, were feeling chronically undermined by their colleagues. And you know, just being able to say that out loud and have that conversation is it's chucking a stone that is going to keep having ripples, and unfortunately to keep having negative ripples for the women who had the courage to say what it is that they experienced. So I, you know, I said I'm sort of noodling on the numbers question, and how one goes about creating spaces where women are not a minority and they don't have to fight for their voices to be heard, because it's, you know, they're likely to have 50% of the airtime, and it's a tricky business. I mean, there's Madeline Heilman at NYU has talked about the unintended consequences of any of policies that are intended to increase the number of women in a given field, or increase the number of women in leadership positions. And you know, women themselves, when they feel like the opportunity for a leadership role is because of some policy and not because of their native capabilities and them being the obvious person to step into this role, they won't seek those roles, right? If that's how they feel, they will be perceived, or the reason that they're offered it. And you can see that play out in organizations all the time, that um, the practices or policies or whatever it is that we would like to put in place to make things better actually, in one at a time, these policies can actually make things worse for women. I had the great good fortune pretty far down the road in my career when I was, calling myself a recovering academic and first getting into, primarily a life of practice and bringing the science of teams and collaboration into the world. I had the great good fortune to be part of a leadership team that really by accident was um, almost entirely women, and it took me a while to realize why it was that I was actually so happy at work, right? So a lot of the, where you were saying the same old, observing that we deal with the same old, right? In a lot of ways. I don't think we're aware until we're out of it how exhausting that is,
Yep.
and how sort of girded for battle you have to be, uh, unconsciously in so much of your working life, and to have that burden taken down and to feel sort of free to breathe and be one be oneself, really taught me a lot about thriving in an atmosphere where there wasn't a sort of knee-jerk assumption that you don't deserve to be there, right? I think
Yeah.
that's a lot of what women are coping with. So I don't want to be a downer. I mean, I want to think creatively about how to create teams and circumstances and workplaces where uh, women get to do their best and to bring all their energy and not to be undermined. And I will continue to do that till the day I die.
Yeah. Well, you certainly have a partner in crime there, Ruth. The team that you spoke of, I guess a big part of our work often is helping teams see and have those conversations about some of the group processes that are going on in teams that might not be optimal. But I'm also conscious that another big part of our work is around helping teams bring that collective attention to their work, which is another kind of insight from Wooly's work as well, in terms of how teams bring collective attention to how they are going to work. So it's like anything in life, isn't it? If you don't have collective attention to the fact that, we have an all female team with one male, it's not that we're going to like say, okay, well, that's not really going to work for us now. We're going to get rid of the males. We have our all female team, or whatever the configurations are on teams around gender diversity. It's having the conversations about, well, what does our team look like? And then therefore, what collective attention can we bring to that and put into place some of the conditions, which would certainly be our approach to teams, that would, set the team up for success. I know one of the things certainly that I bring to our team, for example, is uh, social sensitivity. So, and sometimes I over index on the social sensitivity, on my ability to kind of pick up on the cues of all's not well in the world, if that makes sense. But it's about recognizing that that's an important role on the team, but equally so are many other different roles that
Yes.
need to um, you know uh, occur on a team to uh,
Yeah.
enable the magic, if you like. um,
Yeah. Mhm. I really appreciate that observation, because we're talking about the sort of natural processes that emerge when you configure a team this way versus that way. And
yeah.
posing the alternative, which is instead of just looking at the natural processes. This is actually something I was admired about Chris Argyris, was the notion that sometimes if you want to study a healthy process, you have to create it first because it doesn't emerge naturally, right? So conscious intervention to help teams operate with much more intentionality about understanding like where the talents lie in the team and being curious and eliciting. And that may not be a natural process when people are sort of nose to the grindstone. You know, their attention is on the getting things done. To pull them out of that space in appropriate ways at appropriate times, to do a little reflection and to go back to their work processes with more intentionality. I think that is a lot of what we are able to help teams to do. So that actually that anybody who may feel like an outsider, a token, a minority, or whose voice is held back in some way, can step into the conversation with confidence and know that they'll be supported to actually be heard and to thrive. Yeah.
I'm wondering if we finish up with, if we had any call out to leaders that might be listening to us as to what they might need to consider around, you know, composition of team and taking that collective intentionality and attention to how that composition emerges as a social system. I'm just wondering if, you know, if there are leaders listening to us out there, what would you like to share with them as a potential call to action?
It would probably be a combination of two things. You know, I have a tendency to be a structuralist in how I think. So I'm thinking about proportions and numbers and composition, right, which are conditions or structural circumstances. But I also think paying attention to the process and sort of boosting the process in a positive direction at the same time. So what I would say is act with intentionality in composing the leadership groups around you, the cadre of people that you collaborate with, because numbers do matter. And if you are naturally hanging out with and interested in people who are mostly like you may have to put some intentionality and into looking a little bit more broadly and asking where can you find room for inviting women into leadership roles. So that's the structural actions. It's what's the expectation and how do you manage the emergent social process? So what is the conversation that you want to see in your leadership team? Almost every leader that I speak to says the same thing. I want people to come to the table with enterprise perspective, not battling for their silo and only interested in their own individual responsibilities and performance. I want people who are going to sit at the table with me, and we collectively will be thinking about the enterprise as a whole. So how do you set that expectation? Have you set that expectation? Is that how you have issued the invitation to the table for people to converse in that way? If that's not what's happening in the conversation, do you call it out and do you say, I want something different here, right? I want people to bring their full enterprise hat to this conversation. So the two of those things together, getting the proportions better and the intentionality about how you set up the conversation, I think is actually what I want to underscore is the consequences of that are better for everybody. They're not just better for women.
Yeah, absolutely.
How would you advise?
Yeah. So I'll much like for like, I'll go one structural and I'll go one more kind of
perfect.
Just general. But in terms of, if a leader can really help the team get clear on its purpose and the consequentiality of achieving that purpose, and in the context of that, enabling the team to see the talent and skills that exist on the team to deliver that purpose around, as you said yourself, make sure there is a range of perspectives around you, that it's not just all kind of people that are, too similar to you, to have the range of task skills, team skills. And if you help the team see that range of skills in the context of the purpose, well, then we're taking away whether you're female or you're male or you're, ethnicities and all of these different things. You're just saying, let's look at the talent in relationship to the work. So that would be my structural call out to leaders. My other call out, I guess, would come more back to my lived experience of, do I feel more comfortable in my own skin 25 years into my career, naming things that I see happening around me or to me? So to others and to me, absolutely I do. And I've become pretty okay with the discomforts that other people might feel in me calling these things out. I think we had a team meeting yesterday, and I said, "Oh, so you like my idea?" And again, it's just about tuning into these subtle things that go on in team patterns. That's not so easy when you're at the first stage of your career, because you're so you're so focused on, I want them to feel they made a right decision in hiring me. I want to fit in around here. I don't want to be seen as this, and this. So it's harder for females and others that are being marginalized. It's not just about females. Feminism extends to everybody. It's making it okay for people to speak about what's going on for them in the vortex of the team system, I think is my other call out to leaders. So
that's a great point that you raise. It really makes me want to noodle about how to help young people have that kind of centeredness and courage. You're absolutely right. It is much harder in the early stages of your career. You're in such a state of uncertainty. So
and it shouldn't, just arrive when you've got the gray hairs, or your eyesight has got wobbly, or your hearing is starting to go, and everything that's going on for me, that it feels okay to do these things, right? So I'm always on the lookout for naming it, and I've got quite okay with even going into teams, and as I develop a relationship with the team leader, and there's trust and everything there, and saying, this is an all-male team. I've been working with you for 2 years. What's going on here? Why is it still an all-male team 2 years later? So yeah. On that note, is there, I guess, sending well wishes to all of our community, and wishing everybody a great week, and
to all the women of the world for all their joy and energy and stamina and creativity and courage. Just all my honor and love to all of you and to all of my heroines.
Absolutely. And to more conversations, and opening up more conversations on teams. Indeed. So on that note,
it was lovely talking with you this morning.
Love and happiness, absolutely. And I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Melissa.
Take care.
Well, thank you, everybody.